Hey everyone, it's Lindsay. We've got something a little bit different for you this week. We are re-airing an episode from our friends at Hawksoft's Insurance Perspectives podcast. In this conversation, Carey sat down with Kenny to unpack one of the most talked about topics in our industry, agency acquisitions. They dug into what it really means to buy an agency, how to know that you're ready to acquire, and why team communication is such a critical part of the process. They also touch on evaluating cultural fit, key performance indicators, and the red flags you should be watching for before making a move. It's a really good listen if anyone's thinking about growths, acquisitions, or just wanting a better understanding of how these deals come together.
Welcome, everyone, to the Insurance Refocused podcast. I'm excited to be joined by someone who really needs no introduction in this industry, Carey Wallace. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Kenny. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. For those that may not know, Carey is the founder of Agency Focus, a consulting firm that helps small business owners leverage data to make informed decisions, grow, and succeed. With over 28 years of experience in various leadership roles in the insurance sector, she has a proven track record of developing and implementing strategic plans, translating theory to practical application, and deploying tactics that produce effective results. She is passionate about helping small businesses win and empowering them with data-driven insight and solutions. Carey is a peer in more ways than one, as she is also a co-host of Insurance Refocused podcast, where she and her colleague, who also happens to be her daughter, explore the latest trends, challenges, and opportunities in the insurance industry. It is a great listen, and we are huge fans here at the Insurance Perspectives podcast. Finally, I was delivered a letter by a little bird out of Hilton Head that let me know that Carey is a big fan of photography. And when she is not speaking at insurance conferences, she spends time on the weekends photographing birds, bridges, and the beautiful scenery around Hilton Head Island, where she calls home. Unfortunately, the bird did say that they would like their privacy back and ask you to stop taking their photo. But otherwise, it was a charming note. Well, Carey, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate getting your perspective on this topic.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. And I'm also, too, a very big fan of your podcast. I love that you bring the agent perspective to light in a pretty succinct way. So thank you for inviting me to be a part of it.
Oh, 100%. Really, there was no other option in our minds when we started planning this series. We were like, what's an excuse to get Carey Wallace on our podcast? We found it, but it's going to be an excellent topic. Funny. I'm a huge fan. I listen to a lot of podcasts. And one of my favorite ones is this podcast called Ologies, hosted by a science communicator, Allie Ward, who ends every one of her episodes telling her audience to ask smart people dumb questions, which is my segue into the very first question I have. Carey,
there you go.
What does it mean to buy an agency? Can you talk about the elements of buying an agency?
Sure. It's a great question because there's a lot of people that talk about and use terms that maybe other people have different impressions of what that means. But when I think of an agency buying another agency, it typically is the book of business. So we want to buy all of the renewals of one book, and that could include a location, people would come with it, all kinds of different parts of it. But in my world, 9 out of 10 times that actually means you're going to buy the book of business. Those customers that were with one agency are now going to be yours. You would actually work the renewal process, etc. There are exceptions when you're actually buying the entity as well. That typically is an internal, but again, many agencies are buying just the book. And the reality is if you buy an agency and you buy the entire entity, you buy their assets and liabilities as well. That doesn't typically happen unless it's internal, because why would you want to have someone pay you for the cash you already have? You know what I mean? Like
sure.
you just want to sell your asset. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so you might be evaluating a business and saying like, oh, hey, I want to grow in this town, and this book of business is available for sale, and that would help me grow in this town. Or maybe I want to grow in this vertical. Like here's a I hear commercial trucking is a great niche to specialize in, and here is a commercial trucking agency that is maybe looking to sell their book of business. Does that sound like the scenarios that come up when it's buying?
Yeah, definitely. I want to grow. I want to grow my revenue. I want to grow my footprint. I want to grow with a carrier. So you might
Mm,
actually say, I have this carrier. I know of another agency that also represents this carrier. By putting our books together, I might be in contingency range. Therefore, I can
mm,
create even more revenue inside one agency. So growing by carrier, growing by geography, growing by niche or vertical, but also I might want to grow and acquire some talent as well. Like there's
mm.
lots of different reasons to acquire, but those are typically the most common that I hear.
Does acquiring a book of business always look the same, or is it here is a pile of cash, you give me your customer list, or are there other structures that you see come up in the situation?
That is a fantastic question, and they do look different. So it could be I want to exit, and my book of business has certain qualities about it that make it more risky than another book of business. So it might not be a whole bunch of money up front for that book. It could be pay me over time based on the book that renews. It could be a combination. Give me a percentage of money up front and allow me to continue to work with you as a producer, but you're going to pay me for my book over time based on what the agency retains. It could be all cash up front and I drop the keys and walk away. It could be a lot of different scenarios, but typically the structure under which an agency or a book of business is purchased will be dictated by the health of that book and the
Mm,
synergies that are created between the buyer and the seller. So if this book fits perfectly into what I already have, I might have less risk than someone who has to obtain the carriers or is going into a market that they're not 100%, they don't have any exposure to at this point in time. So based on those risks and the combination of the two, the structure of how that agency is purchased could change.
gotcha. Okay. It's already sounding like a very complex subject, so I'm glad that we have you here to guide us through it. So a listener is hearing this, they're like, okay, yeah, I've heard all the thought leaders talk about, oh, I bought this business, or I've seen this type of agency come into my neighborhood and acquire some books of business. I want to do that for myself now. What are the signs that your business and yourself is mature enough to start acquiring books of business or other agencies?
I've seen agencies at all stages acquire. I've seen, two startup agencies saying, "Hey, this is super hard. Maybe we should do this together." And that's not a true acquisition. That might be a merger. So I don't know that there's a true hard and fast. You have to have all these things before you can acquire or merge or combine books of business. But I will tell you there's some guidelines by which I would say it's going to go better if you have these things in place. So, number one, I think you need to have a handle on your own business before you try and bring another book of business in. You should have clean financials. If you're going to acquire an agency, it might require getting a bank loan. And you want to make sure that as the buyer, you don't slow down that process because your books aren't clean. You've not really reviewed your financials. You want to make sure that you put yourself in a position that your data, your financials, your P&L, your balance sheet is tight. So when you submit it to the bank, they have confidence in knowing how much they can lend, how much profitability exists between you and the potential agency that you're buying. So start with yourself. Number one, do I have clean financials? Number two, what would be a good purchase for you? Not every buyer is right for every seller, and not every seller is right for every buyer. So know what those strategic acquisitions would look like and make sure that you have like your wish list written so you can discern whether or not this is right for you or not right for you. And then do you have capacity? Like if your team is crying uncle and saying we are drowning right now, it might not be the time to say, guess what? I know you're drowning, but we're going to acquire and there's going to be, this bigger body of work that we're going to bring on. And the last is, do you have a process and procedure inside your agency that you could fit this into neatly, or are you going to have to build processes and procedures while you're doing it? You're going to make it really hard on yourself and make that process even harder. So know your financials, know your target, make sure that your team has capacity and that you've got some processes in place so you can have a smooth transition. Those are the things that I would tell you. If some of those things aren't there, maybe take a look and get that shored up before you want to buy another book of business.
Yeah. Um, I can count on one hand the number of times I've reached for a notebook and started taking notes during a podcast recording. Um, I'm at capacity on my one hand at this point. I I love that. That's so straightforward. I love the actionableness of it. Um, the it's cliche to quote Sun Tzu, The Art of War, in a business context, but he's very famous for writing that if you know yourself and you know your enemy, you'll lose no battles, or you'll win 100 battles, or however it's written. Because I think that makes so much sense of not rushing in and not just saying like, oh hey, I can get this banker is not super scrupulous. I can probably get a pretty good loan, and then I'll just go grab this business over here. And you have to spend money to make money, right? And so clearly that's going to make me more successful. But it really sounds like, from your experience and perspective, you kind of have to have your house in order first. You have to have these things understood and have like a clear vision before you go into it.
Yeah, there's situations where people get super excited. I want to acquire. I hear a lot of people are acquiring. It's a great way to grow. Growing organically takes time and money and lots of effort. And this might be the easy way out. Those are air quotes for there's nothing easy about an acquisition. Just so you know, it might be a little faster on the top line, but there's a lot of body of work. There's often times where if you aren't sure who you are and what you're trying to do, that an acquisition can slow down your organic growth, unknowingly, and potentially, rock your team because you acquired clients that expect engagement in a different way than what your agency engages. So you got to go beyond the numbers and understand, does this fit with my agency? And is it right for us? And that takes some time and planning and some getting beyond the emotions and really thinking about this. Does this make sense? Yeah.
In my interaction with agencies, I've encountered agency owners across the spectrum, and a type of agency owner that I can respect, but I don't understand, are often individuals that are like, I'm the agency principal. I'm the captain of this ship. I don't really talk business with my CSRs or my producers. Like, I give them the work, they do their task, I guide the ship. Is there anything you could say to that type of individual to encourage them to do that capacity exploration with their team and be open with their team about, hey, maybe you ultimately own this decision, but you should talk to your team about it before you buy a business? What type of guidance would you give them?
Yeah, I think for any acquisition to go well, I think you need a point person, and that person has to be the one that has their sleeves rolled up, and they're going to do the body of work that's necessary. So I think, communicating with your team to say, hey, listen, there's an opportunity. This is what we're facing. This is what it means for all of you. This is how I expect for it to impact us in the short term and long term. And here's what I envision it would take in order to make this happen. Let's have a conversation about it and talk about how we would tackle it as a team. But first of all, getting that engagement and that kind of buy-in is really important. Number two, if you've never done it before, say, I don't know exactly, but here's what I understand it can be. And I need your help for this period of time. And we're going to, like, how is it going to go? We're going to assess where we are, and we're going to, figure this out. Especially if you're buying a book where you're bringing another teammate on, you need to have that conversation to say, the end goal is this. The road between here and there, there's some unknowns. I need you to know that, we're going to work through this together. It's way better than saying, surprise, here's a body of work. I have absolutely know what it do, but figure it out. This is great.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not necessarily the best way to approach this. I think people relax when there is a conversation, even if you say, I don't have all the answers, but you're acknowledging that there's another body of work here and that
Mm-hmm.
you are willing to help plan it with them. That causes everybody to really relax with this change that you're thrusting upon them.
Yeah, absolutely. We align so much on a lot of this. And the interesting thing is that I feel like I've given all of the same advice to people evaluating technology partners.
Yeah.
Because it's awesome how similar and applicable this is of, taking the time and patience to evaluate and not rush in. I am a huge fan of process and procedures, which is why I'm a huge fan of yours. I think that agencies really need to take the time to document these things and focus on them. And it sounds like they really should be extra diligent in that if they're going to bring on a whole new book of business that could maybe double their agency size or double their book of business. It's increasingly important to have process and procedures if you're going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think by setting the stage, it gives you something to reflect on and say, is what we thought was going to happen, did it happen? And you can
Mm,
debrief and be smarter for the next time. But if you never set the stage to begin with and nobody knows what, the expected time frame is, the expected outcome is, then you really have no way of measuring that, learning, and then thinking about it the next time. So communication's key.
yeah.
I will tell you, your people inside your agency are your biggest asset, and
Hmm.
you need to make sure you're communicating. That's what great leaders do. And whether it's technology that your change requires communication. So whether it's technology that is the change or an acquisition, hiring a new person, changing direction and the focus of the agency, you communicate to those people that are your biggest asset is the way to go every time.
Could not agree more. The next question I have for you is kind of on intangibles, and to kind of paint a picture for the audience. I feel like I've told this story on the podcast before, but my father, who is a fire chief in the town I grew up in, when he would interview new firefighters for the department, during the interview, the formal interview, he'd send someone out to go look at the firefighter's car. Because a big piece of what a career firefighter does is maintaining fire apparatus and equipment in the fire hall and all that fun stuff. So he would
Yeah.
go and send and be like, go make sure they take care of their car. Like, is it clean? Is it tidy? Do they wash it? Whatnot? Um, I'm sure there's some HR rep listening to this. It's just like pulling their hair out right now, but it's a different time.
Right.
So I want to know from your perspective, what are ways that you can see an agency's true colors before you buy them, before you sign that contract and acquire the book of business, or even more holistically acquire the entity and its assets? What are some ways that you can look at those intangibles and get a sense of who they are?
So in an acquisition, oftentimes people get super excited and they also go on this rule of thumb. Well, I heard somebody did X, so therefore they can start correlating and saying, well, that must be true here. The reality is every single transaction or every single deal is different. Every single agency is different, and you're different than the person that's buying. So I would strongly recommend in this relationship driven industry that we're in is spend time,
Mm,
listen, ask open ended questions. If you go with, here's my wish list, and here are the deal breakers for me, and here are the must haves for me, and you sit down with someone and you spend time and ask questions and then stop talking and listen to their answers, they're going to tell you whether or not it's a fit or not.
mm,
And oftentimes I think we get so excited that we keep talking and then we fill in the gaps of what we
mm-hmm,
wanted to hear or maybe never asked but thought we heard, and it's not a fit.
mm-hmm,
What are your customers like? How do you engage with your customers? What, how many of your customers walk into your agency?
mm,
How many pay you electronically? What's the limits that you write for your customer? Like simple things, but then listen.
mm-hmm,
I would also say that for for potential sellers. Research the buyer, go see what they say about their customers. You have to listen to know, is this a fit? Because it has to be a win-win on both sides. But oftentimes we don't. We look at things on paper. We look at and I'm a numbers person. I get that numbers are important, but the cultural fit is far more important than anything. So definitely listen to what they say. And if you get the opportunity to go into their office, look around. Are there filing cabinets? Do their people look happy? Are they, what does their office hours look like? What does it compute with what your office looks like? Does the dynamic look lighthearted, or is everybody, focused? Like, what is it? And does it fit with you? I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but you're looking for fit, right? And if you can get an opportunity to observe in their office, that's huge. If you can get an opportunity to hear what carriers say about that agency, you might have the same carrier rep. There's ways to find out without disclosing anything, and get an idea of what that fit, that cultural fit, is so crazy important.
Yeah. And I think, you mentioned at the beginning that more often than not, an acquisition is for a book of business, and you're probably acquiring those clients and their policies. And so you take over servicing them. Your CSRs are going to take over being the CSRs for those policies. Your producers are probably going to form relationships with those clients. And so it definitely is going to be meaningful to find out, like, oh, hey, are you buying a book of business where 90% of their people walk in the door every month and write and pay with a check? And are you a digital only agency that is like fully remote and you have no place to walk into? I could see that as like kind of a big whoopsie if you find like perfect carrier match, perfect line of business match, everything you want, but then you missed the fact that they're a brick and mortar Main Street America agency and you are a satellite office type of place. I could see that causing a lot of friction with the clients. And then if you're not going to retain that book of business, it's kind of money out the door because that's the value that you were looking to acquire.
I have an agency that bought another agency in their local community, and the one had so many walk-ins that came in and visited for 20 minutes. It was part of their day or their month routine, and the other agency was much more efficient, and it was frustrating to the team to be like, what do we do here? Like it is not that they didn't like the people and they didn't want to build relationships, but that's not how they operated. And everything else, like they were, geographically a fit, they were carrier wise a fit, they were how they write the business a fit. It was just that one demographic is completely different and the expectation was different. And, it took a while to retrain and say, hey, we can't spend 20 minutes on, 6 clients a day, every single day. That slows everybody down, which sounds terrible, but that's the reality,
Sure.
So
let's shift from intangibles to more tangible things. What are a few KPIs that an acquiring agency should focus in on when they're looking to acquire or evaluating a book of business?
Yeah. So there's 27 different risk factors that we look at when we value an agency. And I think you should pay attention to those that apply to the book that you're paying attention to. But here's a guideline. You're looking for, will this book continue to perform in the same way that it has in the past? Is it predictable? And is it reliable? Is it transferable? And can I easily predict the performance? You're going to look for, is it growing? And has it grown, and what's driven the growth? And would anything change my expectation that the book would continue to grow if I buy it? Meaning, are there any relationships that would be changing? Would the referral partner stop doing business with us because the owner changed? So what are the but what is the reason why behind some of these things? And is it possible that would no longer continue? And then what's the risk in the book? Are there areas of concentration that might create risk if I buy this agency, or might tell me how I would want to buy this agency? For instance, is there one account that makes up more than 20% of the book? It could be $1 million agency with no account that's greater than 2% of the book, and same same total revenue, but I have one that makes up 20 or 30% of the book, I'm never going to pay the same way for both of those books. I would adjust the structure of buying it. So is it growing? Are there risk factors that might cause me to not be able to benefit as the buyer? And then is it profitable? So
Mm.
what is the operating profit that I can expect once I buy this book of business? Does the owner want to continue to work? Are they expecting a salary? Are there things that I have to take on in order to continue this book to operate the way that it is? Is there marketing I need to continue? Is there a location that I need to maintain? All of those things impact the profitability of buying that book of business. And it varies greatly from one book to another, from a size book to another book of business. But that operating profit is what will determine whether or not a bank will loan you the money,
Mm.
because they want to make sure that they're going to get paid. So you
Mm.
want to know what that operating profit is going to be and be reasonable about it, and make sure that anything any deal that you enter into, it will be able to cash flow. There's
Mm.
so many people that think you can just take top line revenue and multiply it by something to get to what you should pay for a book of business. And the reality is it has to be based on what profit could you expect with all these other factors that you need to consider.
I'm sitting here working out in my head which state associations I can apply to so that this podcast gets counted as continuing ed.
That's funny. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to that because I think that was so succinct and straightforward. I guess the follow-up question I wanted to ask is there like a threshold for this book of business is too small to acquire? Or is there will there always be an angle for like, okay, this is a small book of business, but there is that operating profit there?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we live in a world where recurring revenue is what makes us so valuable. It's what makes an
Mm.
independent agency so valuable. There's a risk reward kind of thing you need to ask yourself, because the due diligence process on an agency that's 500 in revenue and 5 million in revenue is the same. So you have to ask yourself, am I willing to go through the change management, all of those things for each of those in the same way? And most people's answer is yes, because the recurring revenue is but you want to pay a reasonable price for both of those
Mhm.
things as well, and make sure that it's a good fit. But you know, the smaller books might be paid for in a different way, especially if
Mm.
it's a new book. If it's a book of business that's only been around for maybe 2 years, it doesn't have a track record for you to be able to know the predictability of those customers staying with you versus one that has some longevity. So my point is, it's not just size, it's really complexion of the book
Mm.
and the amount of time and energy that it takes to make a strong, solid decision about that book. So, but you still have to go through the same steps. You got to think
Yeah.
about the same things. What's the loss ratio, and what is it going to do to my loss ratio if I bring it over? What's the complexion of the book? What's the size of the accounts? How many monoline accounts are there? Because that's going to impact the retention of that book. So, you still have to ask yourself the same questions, but the recurring revenue makes it valuable, whether it's a small book or a large book. It just
Hmm.
might mean that you might not pay the same for
Sure.
both. Yeah.
Okay. So then let's explore. Say you get pretty deep with acquiring a book of business. You got a chance to spend time in the office. You got a chance to go through all the numbers, dig through all the reports. Um, you back channel with the carrier rep. You're talking everything. Can you give us a few, like 2 to 3 red flags in an acquisition that would make you say like, hey, this is actually like, we're gonna go evaluate something else, or like, you know,
Yeah.
appreciate your time and effort on this, but it's not feeling right, so I'm gonna walk away. Are there any red flags that you've experienced that's like, okay, you should really tune into this thing?
So if I'm a buyer, I want to make sure I know what I'm buying, right? So a red flag would be the data changes a lot. and I can't seem to get my arms around what is the total book of business. The financials that were sent to me versus the book of business report that came out of the AMS, they don't jive. They can't give me carrier reports for me to verify which number is right. And I really can't get my arms around what is the amount that I'm buying. Like that would be a red flag to say the data is just not there. I'm going to discount it and I'm going to make sure that I cover my risk because your data is unreliable, that you should expect a lower price if there's any question marks. So that's one option. Or you could just say, I'm going to back away, because your expectations about what you want and the reality of what you can produce are very different. That's one. One is producer owned books. Like that is tricky. And producer owned books is complicated because we live in a relationship driven industry where there's lots of things done on handshake for years and years and years. And when you go to sell your agency and you've got handshake agreements and the producer has one impression of what that handshake agreement is and the agency has a different, the buyer is unclear and therefore could be buying something that could end up walking out the door because there's no agreement, or there's an understanding, but it's gray. Gray does not go well when you're selling something, because you might include something that you don't actually own. So producer owned books create gray, and they create some uncertainty about the retention of that book. 1099 producers create a little bit of uncertainty for the same reason. It implies that there could be ownership, especially if there's no agreement. So you just have to be careful that you know what you're buying. And those are some ways that could create question marks around that. In the recent years, buying a book of business in the hard market, and then carrier shifts that have occurred where you can no longer place new business or they're non-renewing, that you need to be very aware of the market you're going into, because you could have the same carrier in a different market and feel really confident about it, and that carrier is not performing the same way in that market. So you need to get some advice and make sure that you don't assume something that is not true. And the last thing I would say is, there was a strategy not too long ago that you acquired a book in order to obtain a carrier appointment. And that is not a good assumption today in this market. So you need to make sure you know that if the rules have changed, you're aware of them and you're not unknowingly doing something and buying a book roll when you thought you were going to get a carrier appointment and you didn't do your homework. So those are some red flags.
Yeah. I think those are phenomenal things to look out for. I hadn't even thought about the complexity that is added by producer-owned book. Is the inverse carry the same risk, where you're specifically looking to buy a producer's book, and then you need to evaluate, does the agency have any claim on these clients?
You need to understand what the agreement is. Do they have the right to move that book, or are you going to hear from that agency and say that there's a non-compete or a non-piracy or non-solicit in place? Like, it's really important that there's a contract and everybody knows what that is and has the expectation. So yeah, whenever there's partially owned books are the worst, because then it's like, what portion of the book does the producer own? What portion of the book does the carrier or does the agency own? And how are you going to decide which accounts get split? You know what I mean? So, or is there just a buyout? Typically what happens is, if an agency really wants to sell and there's partial producer owned books, that agency owner has to clean that up before the sale to someone else, and get like things agreed upon in order to shore that up and make it clear. No buyer really wants to negotiate with multiple people in order to buy the total. That typically doesn't happen. Again, it'll slow down a deal pretty quickly. So yes, I think it's really important to know who owns what. You can't sell what you don't own.
I have one more question for you, and we always love to end on a positive note here in the podcast, an upswing. And so we've talked a lot about evaluating the recurring revenue of an acquisition and the potential increase in revenue and premium volume and size of your agency. But if we could look beyond monetary growth and gains, what kind of success have you seen in agencies who've acquired other agencies or other books of business?
There's a lot of opportunity when you grow and you're able to actually use what you've created. An agency that's forward thinking and they've put processes and procedures in place and they've put technology inside their agency, they can typically attract talent differently than agencies that don't. So now you have volume, you might really be able to impact and attract some talent. You can make a difference in your community in a different way. You might be able to now be eligible to join a network. Like there's lots of ways that it opens doors for an agency that's growing that really gets some traction, and they're able to figure out a different path than maybe they had on their own. There's strength in numbers, and really being able to have more opportunity to really work on that scale. It can really drive your organic growth in a different way because you've now added more carriers, added more markets, have different talent, and been able to reap the benefits of some of the investments you've made. If you're just growing organically, it's a matter of invest in technology and people and then have to grow and catch up. Well, if you do that and you acquire, it allows you to actually build in a different way, which is super exciting to watch. So I think if done well, it can be an incredible strategy for everyone involved, I love watching that happen. I love being a part of helping agents do that. And it's not just, did they make more money? It's, did they create more opportunity in order to serve their clients better, to have their team, work better, and potentially open up other partnerships for themselves.
Phenomenal. And I think that is a great note to land this on. And listeners, do not worry. This conversation has absolutely made Carey Wallace a premier friend of the show. And we are so fortunate that we are going to have her back 2 weeks from now from this episode to talk about perpetuation. Carey, thank you so much for your time today. Please know that inside Hawksoft, your name comes up often and always in the most positive light. There is absolutely a reason why we recommend your services at Agency Focused to our clients. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kenny.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Insurance Refocused podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please be sure to hit subscribe and leave us a review so you'll never miss us. Want to learn more about how Agency Focus can help you grow your agency? Head to agency-focus.com or email Carey directly at carey@agency-focus.com. If you need to get in touch with me, feel free to shoot me an email at lindsay@agency-focus.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week.